Muhammad Ali was 3 months past his worst defeat ever when he heard about a man standing on a ninth-floor ledge threatening to jump. The police had given up, a psychologist had failed, even a minister couldn't talk him down. But the greatest wasn't about to let another human being die on his watch. What Ali did next would prove that his biggest fight had nothing to do with boxing. It was January 19th, 1981, a Monday morning in Los Angeles. The city was just waking up, but on the corner of Wilshire Boulevard and Cloverdale Avenue, something terrible was unfolding. A young black man in flared jeans and a tattered hoodie stood on a fire escape ledge 9 floors above the street. His name was Joe, though that wasn't his real name. The police would keep his identity hidden, calling him only by that single letter. Joe had been up there for hours, and he wasn't coming down. "I'm no good," he shouted into the morning air. "I'm going to jump!" His feet dangled over the edge of the ledge, inches from death. Every time someone tried to approach the fire escape window, Joe would inch forward, closer to the point of no return. Below him, a crowd was gathering, and what they were doing was something that would haunt the officers on the scene for the rest of their lives. "Jump! Jump! Jump!" the crowd chanted. Hundreds of people had stopped on their way to work, not to help, not to pray, but to watch a human being die. Some were placing bets on whether he'd actually do it. Others were laughing, treating the tragedy unfolding above them like it was some kind of entertainment. Los Angeles police officer Bruce Haggerty stood near the window, exhausted and defeated. He'd been trying to talk Joe down for over 2 hours. "We were concerned that he may in fact jump," Haggerty would later recall. "The man was agitated and not being reasonable, and you can't reason with unreasonable people." A police psychologist had tried next. He'd used every technique in the book, every de-escalation method taught in crisis intervention training. Nothing worked. Then they'd called in a minister, hoping that spiritual counsel might reach the desperate man where logic had failed. The minister spent 30 minutes quoting scripture, talking about God's love, about the value of human life, about the people who cared about him. Joe's response was to move closer to the edge. Below, the crowd grew larger, the chanting grew louder. "Jump! Jump! Jump!" Officer Haggerty looked at his watch. They'd been at this for nearly 3 hours. The man's legs must be exhausted from standing on that narrow ledge. Sooner or later, fatigue would make the decision for him. "I didn't have any tools in my toolbox," Haggerty would later admit. "We tried everything." According to police reports, Joe seemed to believe he was in Vietnam, surrounded by the Viet Cong. He kept talking about enemies coming for him, about being trapped, about having no way out except down. The irony was tragic. Joe was only 21 years old, too young to have ever served in Vietnam. But something in his mind had broken, and he was living in a war zone that existed only in his thoughts. 4 minutes away, at his home in Hancock Park, Muhammad Ali was getting ready for a business meeting. At 39 years old, his boxing career was essentially over. Just 3 months earlier, Larry Holmes had humiliated him in a fight that should never have happened. Ali had failed a pre-fight neurological exam, but the Nevada State Athletic Commission had licensed him anyway. The fight was stopped after 10 rounds of brutal punishment. Holmes, Ali's former sparring partner, had cried during the post-fight interview. "All the people involved in this fight should have been arrested," said Ferdy Pacheco, Ali's former ring doctor. "This fight was an abomination, a crime." The signs of Parkinson's syndrome were already showing. Ali's hands had begun to shake. His speech had started to slur. The greatest athlete in the world was becoming a shadow of himself. But on that Monday morning, Howard Bingham, Ali's longtime friend and photographer, received a phone call. There was a suicidal man on a ledge just minutes away, and the police were running out of options. Bingham found Ali and told him what was happening. Ali didn't hesitate. He grabbed his car keys and headed for his silver Rolls-Royce. As he pulled out of his driveway, he turned on his headlights and started driving the wrong way down the street, flashing his lights at oncoming traffic to get out of the way. 4 minutes. That's all it took to get there. When the Rolls-Royce pulled up to the scene,
The crowd's attention immediately shifted. People started shouting Ali's name, trying to get his attention, asking for autographs. Ali ignored all of them. He shook hands with Officer Haggerty, and the two men quickly formed a plan. "We didn't want him to grab the guy or do any of that kind of stuff," Haggerty explained. "We made kind of a game plan, some kind of rules of engagement." Ali understood. This wasn't a boxing match where he could use his physical strength. This was a battle for a human soul, and it would require something different from him, something he'd spent his whole life developing, even if he didn't always show it to the cameras. Compassion. Ali rushed into the building and took the elevator up to the 9th floor. When he reached the window near the fire escape, he could see Joe clearly now. The young man was exhausted. His legs were shaking from standing on the narrow ledge for so long. His eyes were wild with fear and confusion. Ali leaned out of the window. "You're my brother. I love you, and I couldn't lie to you." Joe turned his head, recognizing the voice instantly. Even in his disturbed mental state, he knew who Muhammad Ali was. "The greatest boxer in the world wants to talk to me?" Joe's voice carried a mixture of disbelief and confusion. "I'm not here as the greatest boxer," Ali said, his voice calm now, almost gentle. "I'm here as your brother, and I want to help you." Below, the crowd had gone silent. The chanting stopped. Everyone was watching this impossible scene unfold. Muhammad Ali, dangling out of a 9th-story window in a suit and tie, trying to save a stranger's life. "Do you have a gun?" Ali asked. The police had warned him that Joe might be armed. "No, I don't have anything. I'm nobody. I'm nothing." Ali's voice grew firmer. "You're not nobody. You're somebody to me. You're my brother, and brothers don't let brothers give up." For 20 minutes, Ali talked. He didn't preach, he didn't lecture, he just talked, human being to human being. He told Joe about his own struggles, about the times he'd felt lost, about the moments when the world seemed to turn against him. He talked about his recent fight with Larry Holmes, about how humiliating it felt to fail in front of millions of people, about how his body was betraying him with this disease that made his hands shake. "You think you're the only one who's ever felt like giving up?" Ali asked. "Man, I know what that feels like. But you know what I learned? That feeling passes. The pain passes. But if you jump, you can't take it back. There's no coming back from that." Joe was listening now, really listening. His body language had changed. He wasn't leaning forward anymore. He was turned toward the window, toward Ali, toward hope. "Why do you care about me? You don't even know me. I'm nobody." Ali's response would become one of the most quoted moments of his life. "If you jump, you're going to hell, because there's no way to repent, and I can't let my brother go to hell. I just can't." Several times during the conversation, it looked like Ali was going to fail. Joe would start talking about the voices in his head, about the enemies surrounding him, about how jumping was the only escape. Each time, Ali would pull him back with a story, a joke, or just by reminding him that someone cared. "Do you know how many people are down there watching us right now?" Ali asked. "Hundreds. And you know what? Every single one of them is pulling for you. They want you to come inside. They want you to live." It wasn't entirely true. Just 20 minutes earlier, many in that crowd had been chanting for Joe to jump. But Ali knew that Joe needed to believe the world wanted him alive. Finally, after 20 minutes that felt like hours, Joe made a decision. He turned toward the fire escape door that he'd barricaded shut from the inside. Slowly, carefully, he opened it. Ali was there, reaching out his hand. "Come on, brother," Ali said. "Let's go home." Joe took Ali's hand, and the greatest boxer in the world pulled him to safety. As they came through the door and onto solid ground, Joe collapsed into Ali's arms, sobbing. "Why did you save me?" Joe asked through his tears. "I'm nobody." Ali held him close. because you're somebody to me, and now you're going to be somebody to the world." The crowd below erupted, but this time they weren't chanting "Jump." They were chanting "Ali! Ali! Ali!" The applause was deafening. People were crying, hugging strangers, celebrating the fact that a life had been saved. Ali walked Joe down the stairs and out of the building. True to his word, he led Joe to his Rolls-Royce and put him in the passenger seat. The crowd pressed in, wanting to touch Ali, to thank him, to be part of this moment. Ali waved them off gently and drove Joe to a veterans psychiatric hospital. But Ali wasn't done. At a press conference later that day, Ali made a promise that shocked everyone. "I'm going to help him go to school and find a job," Ali announced. "I'm going to buy him some clothes. I'm going to go home with him to meet his mother and father. They called him a nobody, so I'm going home with him. I'll walk the streets with him, and they'll see he's big." Whether Ali followed through on every part of that promise has been lost to history. But those who knew Ali best say it would have been completely in character for him to do exactly what he said. Ali's life was filled with quiet acts of kindness that never made the news. He would bring homeless families home to his house. He would pay strangers medical bills. He would visit sick children in hospitals without photographers present. This moment on Wilshire Boulevard was just one of countless times that Ali used his fame not for personal gain, but to help someone in desperate need. Officer Bruce Haggerty would later describe Ali's intervention as a gift. He said, "He was kind of the last resort. I didn't have any tools in my toolbox. He was kind of a gift." The story of Joe and Ali should have been international news. Instead, it was largely forgotten, overshadowed by the end of Ali's boxing career and the progression of his Parkinson's disease. But for Joe, wherever he is today, that Monday morning in January 1981 was the day the greatest boxer in the world looked him in the eye and told him his life mattered.
3 years after saving Joe's life, Ali would be officially diagnosed with Parkinson's syndrome, the disease that would slowly rob him of his physical abilities. But even as his body failed him, Ali never stopped fighting for others. He became a United Nations messenger of peace. He traveled to Iraq to secure the release of hostages. He lit the Olympic torch in Atlanta in 1996, his trembling hands holding the flame steady through sheer force of will. When Ali died in June 2016, thousands of tributes poured in from around the world. Presidents, celebrities, athletes, and ordinary people all shared their memories of the greatest. But perhaps the most powerful tribute came from those whose lives Ali had touched in private moments. The homeless families he'd housed, the sick children he'd visited, the struggling students whose education he'd funded, and somewhere, maybe, a man named Joe who was given a second chance at life because Muhammad Ali refused to let him fall. The story of that January morning reminds us that greatness isn't just about what you do when the cameras are rolling. It's about what you do when nobody's watching, when there's nothing in it for you except the chance to help another human being. Ali once said, "Service to others is the rent you pay for your room here on earth." On January 19, 1981, Muhammad Ali paid his rent in full. Dangling from a 9th-story window, holding on to a stranger's hand, refusing to let go until that man chose life over death. That's what real greatness looks like. Not the championships, not the fame, not the wealth. Real greatness is looking into the eyes of someone the world has given up on and saying, "You're my brother. I love you, and I'm not leaving
until you come with me. Muhammad Ali was the greatest boxer who ever lived. But on that Monday morning in Los Angeles, he proved he was something even more important: the greatest kind of human being. If this story of courage and compassion moved you, share it with someone who needs to know that their life matters. And if you're struggling, please remember, you're somebody. You matter. And there are people who want to help you, just like Ali helped Joe. Reach out. Hold on. Choose life.